Well, good afternoon. My name is Eric Getty, and I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs at CBIA, and I'm here to welcome you to the Connecticut Retail Merchants Association and CBIA's Reopening Connecticut's Economy, What You Need to Know webinar. You'll shortly be hearing from three panelists who are here to help answer questions about recent guidance put out by Governor Lamont's Reopen Connecticut Advisory Group. The webinar will focus on two of the sectors impacted by Phase 1 of the economic reactivation: retailers and offices. As in our last webinar about the Reopen Connecticut Advisory Group's work, this is an important opportunity for you to share your challenges and concerns. Your feedback is critical to our panelists during this process, and it's already led to positive revisions in this guidance. Please use the Q&A function located in the middle of your screen to submit your feedback and questions at any time. As this is an ever-evolving process, there may not yet be answers to every question. This is the second webinar in this series, and there will likely be more. Please note this session is being recorded and will be posted at the Connecticut Retail Merchants Association website and at cbia.com. To begin, I'd like to introduce our three panelists and allow each to make some brief introductory comments. For starters, we have Tim Phelan, the President of the Connecticut Retail Merchants Association. We have Commissioner David Lehman from the Department of Economic and Community Development, and Joe Brennan, President and CEO of CBIA. So at this point, Tim, I'll turn it over to you, followed by David and Joe for your comments.
Well, thank you, Eric, and thank you again to Joe and the whole team at CBIA for helping us with production of today's webinar. I also want to thank Commissioner David Lehman for joining us today. I know he's got a very busy schedule and he's going to have to leave us shortly, so I'm going to keep my comments very brief. For the retailers that are on the call today, we're all excited that and anxious, I'm sure, to reopen our stores on May 20th. We hope that today's webinar helps you with some last-minute guidance, answer any last-minute questions you may have, so that when the May 20th does arrive and you do choose to open your store, that you'll do so smoothly and without any questions. But as Eric mentioned, we do know that as this process moves along, there may be questions along the way. So we want to assure you that we'll be here to help you in any way that we can. So thank you for your participation in today's event. And thanks again, Joe and Eric and the rest of the CBIA team for helping us to produce this today. Eric?
Yep. Over to you. Yep. Over to you, Commissioner Lehman.
Okay, I'll go next. Can everyone hear me? You hear me all right, Eric? Good.
Yes.
Well, first off, thank you all for CBIA and Connecticut Retail Association to have me on. Apologies, I'm not going to be able to stay the full time here, but this is really important. We've been 2 months into the pandemic here. We were very focused on response for a long time, and now we're fully focused on reopen. And reopening is going to take some time. Phase 1, as Tim mentioned, is going to start next Wednesday, May 20th. We're starting with retailers. We're starting with office. We still are encouraging people to work from home in offices and not-for-profits where they can. Restaurants will start operating at limited capacity outside. In addition, hair salons will be open. All outdoor recreation, less than 5 people, will be open as well. And then lastly, research at universities. So this first phase is an important phase. Next week as well, I'll point out to this group, we're going to be announcing Phase 2. Both the timing of Phase 2 as well as the industries and businesses that are included. We will likely do that at Governor Lamont's press conference on May 20th, because we understand the importance of providing certainty in terms of timing as much as possible, given it's a very uncertain environment to this group. So stay tuned for that. And ultimately, our expectation is this will be a 3-phase reopening plan for us over the course of the summer. But we're doing it deliberately and carefully, and it's been a privilege. We've had both Joe and Tim on the Reopen Connecticut Workforce and Business Subcommittee, and they've provided a lot of valuable input. Just a couple things I want to make clear here today before we go into the question and answer period. You know, as was mentioned, we put guidelines out on our website for the sectors that are going to open in Phase 1, including both retail and offices. Our goal is to keep putting guidelines out for further businesses and industries in Phase 2. And we're also asking for folks to certify when they reopen that they're in compliance or will be compliant with those guidelines. There's a requirement to train the office staff, the employees as well. And we really want to make sure that this is taken seriously for a couple of reasons, but perhaps most importantly, confidence is really important here, right? Everyone wants to stay safe. We want it to be a clean work environment, the right hygiene, but we've done a lot of surveying on the Connecticut consumer. And there's a lot of anxiety out there, understandably so and justifiably so. So as we bring the economy back, it's really important that everyone embraces these rules and regulations, because that's what's going to give folks the confidence to go to the restaurant, to go to the retailer, to go back to work. Again, we've done a lot of survey work on this front, and I can't stress enough the importance of consumer confidence in an emerging economy here. A couple other things I really want to mention. First and foremost, I had a chance to chat with Tim this morning. For retailers, we heard loud and clear the importance of fitting rooms and being able to utilize fitting rooms. Initially, our perspective was that posed a risk, and we suggested fitting rooms to be closed. But after some dialogue with Tim and a lot of retailers, we took it back to our Rules and Health Committee, and we determined that fitting rooms could be open. Again, we understand the importance of that, but subject to close if they're not purchased, being quarantined for 48 hours, at least 48 hours, to make sure that any potential virus is not on those clothes. Again, it's unlikely, but in an abundance of caution here, this is a virus that spreads quite easily. So either quarantining the clothes for 2 days, or the shoes for that matter for 2 days, or potentially steaming them. So that guidance will be updated on our website if it's not already, but we heard the industry loud and clear on that. Last thing I just want to mention is I do want to talk a little bit about the process that we went through to open up businesses here, because it was a fairly thorough process. Again, Joe and Tim can talk a little bit more about it because they saw it from the inside, a bit of the sausage making, so to speak. But there was a real clear public health lens, is how I'd say it, in terms of thinking about the riskiness of a business. How much contact is there? How close is the contact? How frequent is the contact? And then how long is the duration of the contact? And typical, whether it's a business interaction or a social interaction or something like a place of worship. So we really wanted to take a consistent view across interactions in this committee. And then ultimately, we had an economic lens as well. We looked at how big of an employer these industries were, how many unemployment claims were out there. And retail in particular, I think, was the second, right behind restaurants, if I'm not mistaken, Tim, in terms of just the economic devastation that we've seen and that we quickly want to replace with rebuilding here as we come back. So there's a very rigid framework that we thought was appropriate, balancing the public health aspect and the economic aspect. And our view, as you've heard from Governor Lehman, is we want to start. We're probably starting a bit earlier than states around us, certainly New York and Massachusetts with this May 20th date. But importantly, we're going to be able to monitor, and we've got the testing and the tracing in place, the other interventions for communities that are at risk, to make sure that we're protecting our public as we reopen. And we're going to be monitoring very carefully the virus and increased transmission after May 20th to make sure that we have the hospital capacity and that we're limiting the hospitalizations and the deaths, which have been so terrible here. So with that, I'll stop. I'm happy to take any questions. Unfortunately, I'm going to have to leave at around 1:30, so all hard questions you'll need to ask after that point in time. But with that, I'll pass it over to Joe Brennan.
Okay, thanks, David. Yeah, I'm going to be very brief because I want to be able to get to questions. I see there's some coming in, and David's time is limited. So the only thing I'll just say, as far as the process is concerned, the thing that David just said about fitting rooms is just one example of the flexibility the state of Connecticut has had. We were very involved with developing the rules, safe workplace rules for essential employers back in March. And I don't know, David, how many iterations we had, but they were changed quite a bit as issues came up with companies that would be passed through us or Colin Cooper, the state's chief manufacturing officer, to David, and a lot of changes were made. So as David said, it's a very fluid process. But the accessibility of the entire administration and the flexibility of the administration will hopefully allow us to make sure this is practical. Obviously, public health is number one, but we also want to make sure whatever we're doing is practical for you people that have to implement all these rules and guidelines. So the most important thing is hearing back from you. I don't run a retail business. We need to hear from the folks that do. As far as what some of the challenges are. So I'll stop there and we can get to the questions.
Great, thank you so much. And so can you just one more time say it for the folks who are listening in, because we're still getting some questions. just the rules around the changed rules regarding fitting rooms. And also, can you just touch one more time about whether essential businesses, so businesses that were already open, do they also need to follow these self-certification requirements? Would you guys mind just going over that one more time?
Yeah. So I'll jump on that one. So in terms of the fitting rooms, for those that may have joined late, so we've provided, DCD's put up updated guidance, if it's not up right now, or updated rules, I should say, for retail that's opening up next Wednesday, that enables fitting rooms to be open, subject to, if clothes are not purchased or an item is not purchased that was tried on or touched by a consumer, a 48-hour quarantine or a 2-day quarantine of that product to make sure that if there was any potential virus on that product, that it dies and does not, does not infect anyone else when it's put right on the rack. Or if 2-day quarantine is not desired, you have the ability to steam the clothing and clean and eliminate the virus that way. So we provided that flexibility. We understand fitting rooms are important, in particular for certain types of clothing. So that flexibility is now out there, subject to the mitigants I just mentioned. In terms of the certification, so the certification was envisioned for businesses that are reopening, that are restarting. Businesses that have been operating throughout the pandemic here as essential businesses, they're governed by the safe workplace rules that Joe mentioned there. At some point, we are consolidating. So for example, the safe store rules likely are going to be going away, and the retail rules, which look very similar to them, that's going to be governing all retail. So we're asking for those that are starting up to self-certify. But one comment I'll make, and I think I mentioned this to Tim, if we can all emulate what we've seen in the grocery over the past 2 months, how quickly they've adapted and adopted a lot of these best practices here in terms of one-way aisles, 6-foot spacing, plexiglass, cleaning, masks. That's kind of what we want to see from everyone. But yeah, if you are starting up your business on May 20th, you do need to certify, and you can get a badge to hang in your window, which we think will help from a confidence perspective, in addition to some signage that will be up on the site. But if you have been an essential business, you do not need to do that. We encourage you to, but ultimately there's going to be a migration in an executive order for retailers in particular, to the retail rules that are in place, and for non-retail businesses, the safe workplace rules will still govern throughout the public health emergency.
Eric, can I just add one thing on fitting rooms, just
Please.
to emphasize a point that David made earlier. We recognize that we've gotten feedback from a number of our members about their concern about fitting rooms. Reached out to David. He was incredibly responsive. We did a quick conference call, went back and forth on some different suggestions and ideas. And I think, to Joe's point, it really demonstrates the flexibility that David has, the openness that he has to work with us to make it work. So we do really appreciate that. And I just want to go on record and making sure that, David, you understand how much for those particular retailers, especially the Main Street men's and women's apparel store that need that ability to have a fitting room open to make it part of the experience to shop in those stores. The ability to have that open was critical to their ability to reopen their stores. So thank you very much. And bridal shops as well. Lots of different folks that use that in the apparel world that use fitting rooms. So we really appreciate that.
Yeah, listen, I would just say one thing on that. We Governor Lamont, he comes from business. We understand there's a balance here, right? The public health is critical. We need to get that right. And there's still a lot we don't know about this virus that we're learning every day. So these things are going to continue to change. Sometimes more flexibility, sometimes there might be less, but that's a balance we understand. And everything that we're doing, like with the fitting rooms, we vetted that, Tim, after our conversation with Dr. Coe, with the rules committee, made sure that they understand, hey, is this something we can be flexible on with these mitigants in terms of quarantine or steam cleaning, and we'll turn that around quickly. The other thing, Eric, sorry, I forgot to mention at the outset that we've gotten a lot of questions on what does 50% capacity mean? What does that mean? Because there's really two limitations, whether it's retail or office, that we've put in place. There's 50% of occupancy, and that really is meant to be of fire marshal or of code occupancy. So that's kind of a high level. We like using that because it's intuitive, as opposed to a person per square foot metric, which maybe for the office users is more intuitive. But we really wanted to, if you had a 100-person occupancy in your shop or in your office, we wanted to say the max is 50. But what we think realistically is going to be the constraint is, especially in a lot of offices, certainly in restaurants, the 6-foot spacing that we're mandating between either workstations or tables. Realistically, we think in practice that's going to be what limits the amount of people in a specific space. But I wanted to address, because we've gotten some questions on the occupancy, what does that mean? And that's how folks should think about it. And then if, again, to my grocer example, if there are any, if that's indicative of what we're going to see here, folks are going to operate, at least start even at less occupancy. Some small retail shops I've seen here where I live, they'll say 2 or 3 customers in the store at a time, and they'll keep others waiting outside given the weather. So we're adapting and we're learning very quickly, and I'm confident this group will do the same.
Great, thank you. All right, we're getting some questions about the requirement and the guidelines that employees conduct daily health checks. What is the responsibility of the employer? Do they have to log and track this information? Can you go into a little bit of detail on that?
Yeah, so we're getting into the weeds pretty quickly here. So yeah, listen, this is, we can have a whole debate in terms of individual rights and you know, employer, employee, kind of how that dynamic's going to work. I think how I would think about it is, you know, it's critical, and we are mandating the training of the rules to make sure that everyone understands the protocols that need to be in place, the protections. You know, in terms of the daily temperature checks, logging that, we would encourage folks to track that, at least at the outset. I just think it's smart to do that. If an employee says, you know, I'm not taking my temperature, or I'm not doing that, you know, ultimately that gets into this gray area where it's challenging, and we understand that, and we're not looking to disrupt the workplace. But how I would think about that is employers should absolutely encourage their employees to do that on a regular basis. I would try to log it, but if that becomes problematic, or if you have certain employees that are objecting because of their rights, you know, ultimately, the way I think about that is that's not a threshold issue, but ultimately employers are going to need to have some judgment on that point.
Hey, Eric, since you're talking about temperature checking, I just want to mention quickly, it was just announced by the governor early this morning that the state is making thermal thermometers available to businesses with 100 or fewer employees in Connecticut, and that includes both essential employers and those that are just reopening as of May 20th. Without going through all the details right now, in the sake of time, it's going to be the same process that we used to distribute some masks to companies of 50 and under a couple of weeks ago. There's a website, we can give this to you later, it's just ctcovidresponse.org, and companies can go in there and make a request, and then we'll work through the towns to get your thermometers. I don't want to take up more time on that because David's got to leave soon, but
no,
at the end of the program, I'll give that again. No,
that's a perfect point. Yeah, we bought 100,000 thermometers from China earlier this week, and we're going to give half of them out to, again, Joe, I'm glad you brought that up. Not just essential businesses, not just non-essential businesses, but all small businesses between 2 and 100 employees that want them, as well as nonprofits, as well as faith-based organizations. So we really want to get that out there to, you know, make it easier for employees and employers to basically check health where possible.
Thank you. One of our attendees, Russ, has asked about the requirements and the guidance that those in high-risk groups and over the age of 65 should continue to stay home, stay safe and stay home. Is there going to be additional information out about who is considered to be in those high-risk groups, and what are your employer obligations related to those people, keeping them out of the workforce, and what happens when those people really want to come back?
Yeah, this gets to this sensitive issue in terms of individuals' rights, which, you know, it's a real issue, and we should treat it with care. So from our perspective, we are encouraging folks, the public, if you're 65 or older, or if you're high risk. I don't believe, you know, the state is going to separately define what high risk means in terms of comorbidity, Eric. But ultimately, we're telling those folks to stay home still after May 20th. And what that does is we're trying to communicate clearly. So if they are offered their job back, you know, they have an ability to say, no, I'm in that group. I don't want to do that. I'm not ready to do that yet. And that will afford them the ability, most likely, to continue to receive unemployment benefits, because we've all seen the numbers, or many of us have seen the numbers in terms of who the virus impacted. It is disproportionately impacting older people in the state of Connecticut, as well as folks with pre-existing conditions. So from an employer responsibility perspective, we realize there's going to be a 66-year-old that says, I know what the governor is saying, but I want to work. And ultimately, again, this gets into this battle that person, we're not going to, from the state's perspective, it's not going to be a mandate. We're strongly encouraging it. So if someone says, we're trying to give them the flexibility to stay home, but if they really want to get out there and work, they have the ability to do that. Again, I can't say this strongly. We do not want that to happen, but at the same time, we can't age discriminate in terms of who can work and who can't work.
The next question we received from a number of people, Vincent and Abigail included. Does legislation need to be passed to limit liability for businesses that follow all the rules, or can that be done through executive order? And maybe you could tell us whether conversations around such either an order or a provision among legislators has been happening.
So it's a great question. It's one we've gotten a lot. It cannot be passed it cannot be done by executive order because of just the nature of this being a public health emergency, and really all of the stuff that Lehman has put forth has been focused on public health. So an order that would limit liability at the employer level, would not pass that bar, candidly. So if the state were to do it, it would need to be done through legislation. Obviously, we're aware of some of the federal dialogue around this and broader kind of tort reform that may or may not happen. I think our view right now is we're trying to provide as clear as possible guidelines to follow. And ultimately, the best thing employers can do is follow those guidelines to a T as much as possible. And that is the best kind of protection. Are there going to be lawsuits potentially, some of which might be valid, some of which might not be valid? That's going to happen. We know it's happening elsewhere, but there's nothing more, unfortunately, from an order perspective that the governor can do at this point in time. And candidly, I think there's moral hazard risk there too. We want to make sure everyone's taking this seriously, as opposed to a blanket, even if we could, a blanket type of liability limiting, because we want to make sure that everyone really embraces these best practices.
Eric, can I interrupt for just a second and ask David a question? Because again, I know his time is short. And David, one of the challenges, not challenges, but one of the benefits of running the Retail Association is there is such a diversity of membership because there's such a diversity in retail. And one of the retail sectors that we represent are furniture retailers who oftentimes do home deliveries. And that also applies to appliance dealers as well. Any guidelines or suggestions or anything with respect to home deliveries of those products?
So as it turns out, our washer and dryer broke a couple weeks ago. So we had a home delivery ourselves from a company down here in southwestern Connecticut. Listen, right. I think best practices there, I think, are, when the delivery person came in, gloves, mask, right? The touch points is where we need to be really careful. I think ultimately, that can, whether it's furniture or appliances, that can be done safely through the same PPE and maybe a bit beyond that in terms of gloves in particular. That's going to be done in the retail stores. Otherwise, I think they should continue just to use good hygiene, and there shouldn't be any issues there.
Okay, so no prohibition about entering and anything like that. Okay.
No, again, that has to happen, right? Someone's icebox or refrigerator breaks, that needs to be fixed and replaced, and then we want that to happen. I think the new normal is there's going to be some virus among us for a while until there's a vaccine, and whether that's the end of the year, next year, who knows? But the protections of the face masks and the gloves and the constant washing, cleaning, that's going to happen. And my view is we need to get comfortable with life going on like that, just mitigating the risk as much as we possibly can. But no prohibition.
Great. Perfect. Now, you talked earlier about the ability of people to use fitting rooms, provided that the clothes are either immediately and thoroughly steam cleaned or they're quarantined for 48 hours. Would similar requirements be put in place for other types of stores? For example, think of a linen shop or perhaps a furniture store where people are sitting on furniture or basically anything that people have purchased in attempt to return to the store. Is there a similar quarantining requirement?
Yeah, so listen, stores are going to come up with their own return policy. We're not being that prescriptive in terms of here's what your return policy needs to be. I think if a store does elect to take a return, and I realize some stores haven't been doing that and won't do that, but if you do elect to take a return, I think it's just smart to quarantine it to make sure before anything goes back on the rack that it is clean and that it is safe, or to be steam cleaned. So I think that is sensible, for a linen store or a furniture store. Again, people are going to need to make judgments in these stores. How much, and we realize the sensory experience, the touching of the fabric, that's important, but there's going to need to be some judgment ultimately on, how best to do that. How can we get the consumer comfortable that they understand, this is what they're purchasing and they want to go buy it, but at the same time that the next consumer isn't concerned that it is, somehow some risk of virus transmission. So it's going to really come down to the store, and I'm sure, just like the grocery example, best practices will continue to evolve. But I think reducing the touching of merchandise as much as possible, and I realize that's hard for retailers, but I think that's just smart to ensure confidence, because the last thing a retailer wants is for it to be believed that a bunch of folks, and I've seen this in the grocery store again, and I hate to keep coming back to this example, but if someone's touching something and doesn't buy it, I see other people shaking their heads. So we need to make sure that there is that confidence from all consumers that they're not touching something that could be dirty.
Eric, I'm going to take a prerogative again, because I know David's going to leave, but David, we learned a lot in the so-called essential retailers versus a period of time. One of the questions that comes up a lot is enforcement of these guidelines. How do you, oftentimes on a Saturday, I'd get a phone call from a mayor's office, or how do you envision, because now the swath is going to be much greater throughout the whole state. How do you envision enforcement of these guidelines taking place?
That's a great question. I'm glad you asked it, actually. We're finalizing that now. We're working through it. There will be an executive order likely today, could be over the weekend, that basically goes through it. It's going to do a number of things. It's going to extend certain businesses beyond May 20th not to operate. It's going to enable the May 20th business to operate, and it's going to touch on the enforcement mechanism. And likely what that's going to be is whether it's employee complaints or customer complaints. And I agree, Tim, it's going to be broader now that you have more establishments open, but it's going to be two-pronged. So there's going to be local law enforcement, similar to previous executive orders, where we're going to give them guidelines where, for example, if it's the first time there's a complaint or a question and it's not a serious infraction, it's likely going to be a warning. But beyond that, the governor's executive orders are misdemeanors, and there's the potential for there to be a fine or a criminal misdemeanor charge. It's not the intention to do that, but at the same time, we really want to make sure that there's compliance. So those are the two things that are available on the local law enforcement side of things. The thing that we're adding though now is local public health. We are going to enable public health inspectors, again, whether it's a serious infraction or if there's two or more infractions after we're past the warning phase, they'll have the ability to come in and assess the public health of an establishment, and if it's compliant or not with the rules that have been outstanding. And to the extent that there is non-compliance there and it's significant, they'll have the ability to basically revoke licenses and shut down establishments for the balance of the public health emergency. So this will be through the emergency order for public health. And right now that goes through September. Again, this is not something we want to utilize, but it's really important to us that we have a mechanism that has teeth here, and that's one that we're adding, and we think it's appropriate because we want to make sure there's compliance. Again, hopefully we don't need to use it, but the remedy that we're going to need to resort to is potentially a revoking of the license on a temporary basis. I apologize. I've got time for maybe one more question, and then I see you gave me all the hard
Commissioner. Commissioner, no, we wanted to give you the last minute or so of your time. I know you're off to a very important meeting, and so if you want to say any final thoughts in this last minute or two, but anyway, we truly appreciate how generous you've been with your time today. So by all means,
I would
please.
just say, I appreciate Eric, you, Shannon, Tim, and Joe, and the team for having me. It's great having the ability to address this many folks. I just think this is, as Joe and Tim mentioned, this is a collaboration, right? This is about balance. We're learning a lot. We need to be flexible. Again, sometimes it's going to be viewed as positive, and I'm sure there's sometimes when it's going to be viewed as negative. I can't stress enough, though, over the medium term and longer term, us taking these rules seriously, the distancing seriously, making sure that transmission doesn't increase, that is the best thing for our economy. My biggest fear and what keeps me up at night is, you know, it only takes a couple bad actors and all of a sudden you have a super spreader event. The virus is out of the bottle. It grows exponentially, as we know. So we need to take this very, very seriously from a business perspective, because it's not like you can slowly slow down. What happens if we get this wrong is we stop again, and then you start this clock all over again, and that's not what we want. So I just really, really appreciate everyone taking it seriously, and thank you for all the great questions.
Thank you, David. We really appreciate it from the retail industry, your willingness to work with us.
Absolutely. I'm sure we'll keep the summer. It's still early here in the late spring and summer, so this is going to be going on for a while.
That's right.
Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thank you, David.
Take care.
Okay, so you're going to continue with questions for us, Eric?
He's trying to connect to his audio. Well, Joe, while Eric is trying to connect to his audio, can we talk a little bit about David's?
There we go.
Okay, maybe we could talk a little bit more about the older worker issue coming back, because I know in the retail industry, you know, we have a range of folks that work in our stores, including some of those in the vulnerable age group. What did you think of his response?
Yeah, you know, we've had that conversation with him a lot. The state cannot discriminate. They can't tell you you cannot go to work. They're just strongly encouraging people 65 and older, excuse me, and then with, you know, those comorbidities, whether it's respiratory issues, lung issues, whatever it may be, not to come to work. It's pretty simple. But again, you can't force people to stay home or, you know, bar them from entry if they come into work. That's just something that every employer is going to have to deal with directly with their employees. And hopefully most, if not all people, will understand the challenge of having people that are at high risk going into a workplace. And then, you know, there may be limited or additional guidance down the road if problems come up. Right now, it's hard to anticipate how that's all going to work. I know some of the essential businesses that have been open, particularly the small and mid-sized manufacturers that I talk to all the time, you know, they've got a lot of, you know, older people in their workforces too. And for the most part, people are staying home if they're older, partly because they're asked to and partly because they want to. So again, it's hard to anticipate what particular challenges folks are going to have. But when those come up, they just have to pass them through to you or to me, and then we go right to DECD and try to get some guidance.
Yeah, I agree.
Well,
I agree. They shouldn't you shouldn't hesitate to email us if you have any questions about any of these guidelines at any time, especially with a local enforcement, as David mentioned. I know from experience with the essential retailers, the mayors and the first electmen are on patrol on the weekends. So in particular. So if you feel like there's an issue that you need assistance with, you should not hesitate to reach out to us. We will do everything we can to help you.
Hey, Tim, I know Eric's got some more questions, but I just, you know, viewing some of the things that come in through the Q&A, there's still a lot of questions on this 48-hour issue.
Right.
People are saying, can I spray with a disinfectant? What if my particular goods would be damaged if steam cleaned? And I know this just came up today, as far as became public today, that people can use fitting rooms. But is there any more guidance that you're expecting on that, or any help you can provide to people that have questions like that?
Well, I think the only help we could, I don't expect any more guidance other than what David's already sent. I think we could ask, if we had to, individual questions. I think the simple response is to try to do as close to what the guidance says to do that you can. So quarantine the clothes, as David said, or steam them if you can't quarantine them. And we'll continue to look through the industry within the retail apparel world. We'll look for guidance there, as well as with a number of dry cleaners that are members of ours that may be able to provide some guidance and assistance to those retailers that choose to steam clean clothes. We could probably come up with maybe some guidance and best practices that you can follow for that.
Yeah,
We do have a
Just one other comment, Eric, before we go back to you, and it goes back to a question we got earlier. You know, with the limited guidance that I can give to people that I've been giving is, you know, do the very best you can to comply with guidelines, because no two businesses are the same, no two retail businesses are the same, and I think the state understands that. The problem really is what somebody asked earlier about liability. The concern is if you can't follow something 100%, just given the needs of your business, and somebody does contract the virus, the liability that may open you up to. And as David said, we're not going to get that through an executive order. Frankly, I think it would be very difficult, or at least difficult to get it through the legislature, which is not in session right now. So there's not going to be no immediate resolution there. David referenced the federal issues, and that's a big issue. I'm on calls with other state organizations all the time and a lot of national calls. And the next package that may come through Congress, as you may have seen in the media, the Democrats had a $3 trillion proposal, House Democrats. The Republicans are pushing for some liability reforms. So if there is another deal, hopefully it will not only include some aid to the states, because that would certainly help out Connecticut's budget and all our taxpayers here, but also some liability reforms. The best guess of the experts in DC is we may not see that package until sometime later in June, or maybe early into July. So unfortunately, that leaves all you folks in a really precarious situation here. The only other advice I can give is just document. You know, everything you're doing to try to keep your place clean and safe, all your employees safe and healthy. Document everything, and that's the protection you can have right now. And then follow all these guidelines as very closely as you can, understanding that, you know, nothing's perfect, but do the very best you can and document everything. And hopefully that will provide you some protection if there is any litigation down the road.
It's good advice, Joe.
Gentlemen, maybe you could tell us what are some of the other steps that you can think of that some of these businesses may be able to take to ensure greater safety? I mean, are they allowed to take the temperatures of customers entering their store? Can they refuse service if a customer doesn't want to have their temperature taken? Can they close their restrooms to the public if needed? You know, just what other steps beyond even the guidelines would you recommend, or do you think people are allowed to take?
Well, I think I mean, for our industry, in the retail industry, it's really a tricky thing because customer communication, customer relations is key to, you know, any kind of retail business. So I know many of our members are going to tread very lightly on trying to have strict enforcement of certain things like a mask. They're going to encourage and hope that everybody wears a mask and try to avoid where they can a confrontation. So I think that the best advice that we could give them is to, as Joe said, try to follow the guidelines as best you can. Show your self-certification in the window of your store. Try to have your signs as clearly displayed as possible to ensure the customer that you are doing everything possible to not only comply, but you're maybe even going above and beyond to comply to make sure that the store is a safe environment for the customer to come into. And we will do our best whenever we can get the opportunity through the media and other sources to spread the word about how safe it is to go back out and shop. But to just the last point I'll make is to David's point earlier, the only way we're going to get from phase 1 to phase 2 is if we do follow all the guidelines and the requirements that are out there, so that the data will show the results of the efforts that we're doing, which will allow us to gradually get to where we all want to be safely.
Yeah, just real quickly on that, Eric, because we're getting an awful lot of questions about temperature taking and testing and things like that. Tim and I were invited to participate in one of the meetings of the testing subcommittee. And clearly their goal is to not have any mandates on employers, but more provide a list of options for employers to use. One would be diagnostic testing to find out if employees are carrying the virus. antibody testing if that becomes available. And then on the temperature taking side, it's not going to be a mandate, but companies are certainly can do that if they want to do it. A lot of our members are doing it already. The issue comes if somebody refuses. What do? You get into privacy rights and everything else. Unfortunately, I don't have clear answers to that right now. The companies that I'm aware of where people are taking temperatures, excuse me, we're live. We're taking temperatures. You know, for the most part, employees like it. They like knowing that other people are having their temperatures taken. And again, there's a lot of asymptomatic people out there, so taking a temperature doesn't necessarily obviously tell you if a person's asymptomatic, they don't have a fever. But all the feedback I'm getting is relatively positive. So I would encourage employers, if you want to go down that route, to go down that route. As I mentioned earlier, there will be free thermometers being made available to businesses with 100 and fewer employees. We'll give that information again at the end of this program. But as far as people refusing and your rights there, you know, talk to your attorney, because we just don't want to open people up to liability any more than is already happening.
Now, in your answer, I'm sorry, go ahead, Joe.
Just while I'm on that topic of PPE, we haven't gotten, at least I haven't seen a question about masks yet, but obviously under the safe workplace rules that David talked about, employees are required to wear a mask in the workplace unless you're in an enclosed office or lab or something, place where you're by yourself. Otherwise, you have to wear a mask. So for all these new businesses coming online, there's going to be more demand for masks out there. So DECD will have, they've already have it live, but I think it's going to be augmented at least sometime today. List of suppliers for a variety of things. I was on another committee where we were asked to try to come up with lists. So I wish there was one easy site where you can go on and just put in, I need 55 masks, and you know, the next day they're delivered to your shop. That's not going to happen. But there will be a variety of places where you can go either for masks or gloves, cleaning supplies. You know, all through these regs, there's a lot about disinfectant wipes, and they're very, very difficult to find right now. And you may not be able to find those, but there are alternatives using soap and water and other things. So if you just go on the DECD site, you'll be able to get information, not only that self-certification, but all the guidelines, as well as places where you can go for some of that personal protective equipment and related supplies that you may need.
Yeah, Eric, can I just follow up on that real quick? I know
Please.
Joe mentioned supplies. The supply line is tight. And we know that under the requirements for retail stores to reopen, they're going to have signage in certain areas of the store. And they're also going to have, you know, barriers, if you will, or protective guides, things in between the customer and the point of sale system. And those two may be difficult to get to. And we were, to get your hands on it, we did ask DECD. I wish David had time for this question. And if you can't get that, I think DECD understands that may be a difficult purchase for you to get right away. And as long as you're making an effort to try to get that and put that in place, you're doing your best to try to comply with those guidelines. As Joe said earlier, then, you know, call us up if you're feeling like you're going to be out of compliance, and we'll talk to DECD and work it through for you, because we know that in some cases you may not be able to get your hands on that type of product that you're looking for.
Now, Tim, you actually touched on what was going to be my next question, which is the signage requirements in the guidelines. Can you talk a little bit about those requirements and where can people find some of these signs?
Yeah, well, signs are going to be required for retailers. They're going to have, there's under the guidelines, which you could see. I think we've emailed them out. They should be on our website. If they're not, I'm sure we'll get them posted on there. But there are specific guidelines and floor markings that you're supposed to have for 6 feet distancing, some signs throughout the store that demonstrate you've done certain and notify customers of certain things. You could buy those, you know, typically you could get those on your own, or the association is working on with a couple of sign companies to offer that to members to purchase through us. So if you're a retailer, just stay tuned. We're going to have some information more about where to have signs and some masks, face coverings that you could purchase as well. We'll work with Joe at CBIA where we can, and the state, to try to get some free masks those out to you as well. But signs are definitely going to be required, and we are working on trying to get a program out to our members so they can purchase signs through the association. So just, we're working on that.
Great. Now, just because, doors are allowed to be open on May 20th doesn't mean that there's not issues with getting employees to come back. Can you guys tell us a little bit about what you're hearing from some of the businesses that are already open, some of their struggles, and what you're hearing from the folks who may be trying or planning to open on May 20th?
Yeah, just all kinds of issues. Not in any particular order, but with daycare being shut down, or not shut down, but daycare limited for a lot of people. Now we're getting into summer camps. We're not quite sure what it's going to happen there, but they're very limited there. So just childcare issues are a big problem for a lot of people to get back to work. Fear, you can't discount fear. There's just a lot of folks that are very concerned about going in. I know Tim and I have been hearing a lot from people, hair salons and other places that are concerned about going back because of the proximity they have to customers. And then, the unemployment comp issue, I certainly understand the concern for anybody that's lost their job. There's no question about that. But employers are hearing directly from employees that have been temporarily laid off that they're choosing not to come back to work because of the $600 additional payment is making it challenging to get some people that have been laid off back into the workplace as your business is getting ready to open up. And then the fact, a lot of, as Tim said, and I said earlier, there's a lot of folks that are, 65 and above that are still in the workplace, and they're being strongly encouraged not to come back to work. So for those essential employers that have been open, these are all problems for them too. Most of the ones I've talked to have been able to manage around it. Manufacturing has been open all along. A lot of small manufacturers have these same problems with their folks, but for the most part, they've been able to work through it. But I think that's going to be a big challenge for a lot of companies to make sure they have the personnel. They may not need as many right away because of the capacity issues that are part of these guidelines. So you may just bring back a skeleton staff or half your staff. Yeah. But that may make it a little bit easier to get through these first few weeks. But unfortunately, these are things, there's no easy answer that we can give you. You just have to work with your employees as best you can, understanding the law and understanding the rules and guidelines, and hopefully you'll have enough to operate. Tim, I don't know if you've got...
Yeah, no, I would always say, Joe, those are really good points. And they're just exactly what I was going to say. For retailers, there's another set of challenges too. It's getting getting those employees back, to get them retrained as to back to some, and so it takes some time to do that. They may not, I know from some national retailers are not going to be open on May 20th. They're going to wait a couple of days till they get their staffs back in order and retraining. Don't forget, when you have to restart your store, there's things you're going to have to do to be ready, including some of the things like making sure your electrical is working right, and your POS systems are working right, your credit card systems are working right, your water is running right. All those things are really critically important to get the store up and running again. Again, maybe this isn't an issue for a lot of retailers because of the ability of many of those stores to remain open and do curbside pickup. But for those that have been shut down, those are kinds of things that you have to start thinking about now, and what primarily, retraining employees, getting them ready to get back and deal with customers, along with all the other stuff that Joe said, dealing with, reluctant employees who are nervous about interfacing with customers again. Those are real big challenges that we recognize people have before they reopen.
Now, you just talked about employee training, and I believe the guidelines do indicate that employees do need to be given some amount of training in these new safety protocols. Is guidance coming out? Do you have any knowledge of whether guidance will be coming out regarding that training for employers out there, or you know, is there some best practices that they can be looking into?
I don't know that there's going to be any additional guidance at this point. Maybe down the road there will be. I think the state, you know, has tried to be flexible. And as I said earlier, no two businesses are the same. So as long as you meet whatever is in the guidelines about training your employees on protocols around cleaning, excuse me, cleaning and social distancing and PPE and everything else. And then the guidelines also say to have kind of a refresher each week, because things will change. As we all know, things are changing rapidly. So just to update your employees. Now, whether that can be just if you're a larger company, sending an email to employees, or if you're a smaller firm, getting people together 6 feet apart, obviously no more than 5 in a room at a time, but you know, doing personal training like that. But you know, it's a double-edged sword here. In some ways, we like that flexibility, so you can adapt to whatever your needs are in your business. But on the other hand, too much flexibility can be a little bit dangerous for those liability issues I mentioned earlier. So we're kind of going back and forth with David and his team on trying to give the best guidance we can to the employer community.
Eric, can I just add to that? I know that I know we're running up against the end of the hour here, but I wanted to just share this. We know from experience with the essential retailers that there, as Joe said, changes all the time that are going to take place. There will also be bumps in the road along the way. There's no doubt. I mean, and that's why it's important that we stay in communication with you throughout this process, because as we experienced with essential retailers, when first opened up, there were challenges that took place, but we working together smoothed those challenges out, and now, you know, things are, you know, have been pretty steady. We expect that that'll happen when all retail reopens on May 20th. And so we think we're confident we've built enough of goodwill and relationships with David and his team and the governor's office that if challenges come up with local law enforcement or even with other state officials, don't hesitate to contact me and contact us. And I know Joe feels the same for his members, and we'll be happy to work with you, because as David Lehman has demonstrated, I think, is that the state wants this to work, and they want businesses to be able to work through this, and for us, they've been very good to work with. So we recognize that it may be a little rocky at first. You might run into a couple of incidents, but don't hesitate to contact us, and we'll try to, you know, help you work through that.
Great. As you said, we're coming to the top of the hour, but one more question for you both, and it's related to something that Commissioner Lehman said earlier. You know, he talked about within a couple days of May 20th, you know, when phase 1 gets underway, there would be an announcement regarding timing and some of the details regarding phase 2. Can you tell me what you guys, you know, what you're hearing, what you hope is part of that next phase, or anything else that, you know, people out there would want to hear?
You want to start with that one, Tim?
Yeah, I'll try. I think phase 2, the hope is that it'd be, I think the governor has said this, 4 to 6 weeks at the most, 6, hopefully 4 weeks after phase 1. So you're looking around June. And some of the industries that that are not now, things like potentially gyms and others may be open. I guess the only thing I would say before we get to phase 2, we have to make sure that we do phase 1 right. And that means that we have to be really careful to make sure that we abide by all the guidelines, that we do all the including all the social distancing and the safe stores, because as I can't emphasize this enough, for the retail industry, we do not want to stop. We want the stores to be open and remain open. The guidelines the phasing in phase 2 it'll be dictated by factors that we can control, but quite frankly, you know, it's going to be the the data, the numbers are going to really dictate when phase 2 begins. But I just really want folks to concentrate on, let's make sure we get phase 1 right before we jump ahead too fast to phase 2.
Yeah, Eric, the only thing I'll add is that the state's going to ramp up testing over time quite a bit. It already has, and it's going to continue to accelerate. So we're going to have more and more people probably show up as infected. So it will depend on what the rate of that infection is. Obviously, you're going to have more negatives too, as well as more positives. So as long as that infection rate stays fairly low and the other metrics that the governor always talks about, particularly hospitalizations, continue to drop, then hopefully we can move safely from phase 1 to phase 2. Hopefully sooner rather than later. I've talked often about the fact that we have all these essential businesses that have been open in Connecticut. And although there have been infections in some of those workplaces, for the most part, people are working safely. So just to underscore Tim's point, as long as it'll be in a perfect world, everybody, every single employer, every single employee, and every member of the general public does the right thing as far as wearing masks, washing their hands regularly, keeping their hands away from their face, keeping 6 feet apart or more. If everybody does all those things, we can have very safe workplaces and hopefully get more and more open, and open even quicker than anticipated. But it is going to really come down to every individual in Connecticut and how they adapt to these things. And frankly, I'm hearing from people that are angry and don't want to wear masks and don't want to have their temperature taken and other things. So that's just going to be the challenge we're going to have going forward. I would like to see things accelerate, always underscoring the fact that public health and safety comes first. When I'm looking at the number of unemployment claims in Connecticut, it's really, really scary. And the longer people are out, the harder it is for their businesses to recover and for those people to get back into gainful employment. So as you know, we keep overusing the word balance. It really is a balance, but I'm hopeful that we can move forward safely from phase 1 to phase 2 as quickly and as safely as possible. And while I got the floor here, just real quickly, I saw one question on PPP. That is a very, very complicated area. I don't feel comfortable in this format to give advice on that, but I would ask people to check with your lender. There are very tight guidelines around having these loans forgivable as far as your number of employees and things like that. So at first stop, I would be to your lender and try to get some good answers from there. If not, check with the SBA in Connecticut for guidance. And if not, go to your attorney. Doesn't have to be in that order, but in some order, because it's very complicated rules. You don't want to mess that up. The good news is if you do have to pay it, it's only at 1% interest. But we would like companies to have those loans be forgivable and not have to pay them back. So check with those sources for good guidance, and hopefully that'll help you.
All right, time for final words. We'll stick with you, Joe. Any final thoughts for the attendees?
No, I think I said it in my prior answer, just as far as following the rules, continuing to reach out to organizations like CBIA and Connecticut Retail Merchants Association, or going directly to DECD. We're all working as hard as we can possibly work to make this easier for you, if I can use that word, give you the best guidance we can give you. We're doing our very best to make it a smooth transition for you, but we need your feedback. We need to know what's working and what's not working. Any best practices. One thing I always say about Connecticut business people, they're incredibly resilient and incredibly innovative. So if you come up with something that works in your shop, share it with Tim or share it with us. We can get that out to other employers. So I know it's a cliche to say we're all in this together, but it's really true. So anything you can do to help your fellow citizens or help your fellow employers, let us know.
Great. And to you, Tim.
Yeah, Eric, again, one last thank you to you and Joe and Shannon and Katie and Joe for helping us produce this. To all the retailers that are on, just to reiterate Joe's point, we're doing everything we can to help you. If you have any individual or specific concerns about stuff, please don't be afraid to reach out to us. That's why we're here. Our concerns are, we want to do everything we can to help you succeed to help you relaunch your business. So anything, don't hesitate. We know it's going to be challenging along the way, and we just want you to know that through CRMA, that's what our focus is. How can we help you, and how can we help you promote your business and get back to a somewhat normal routine? So we're here, and good luck on the reopening, and please don't hesitate to reach out to us.
Great. Well, it is 2 o'clock, and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. And I'd really like to thank all of the attendees for joining us here today. If your question was not answered live, please know that we will do our best to ensure that you get your answer within the coming days. And any comments, suggestions, or concerns you have or that you submit to us will be forwarded on to the panelists to aid in their work. I want to remind all of you that this session was recorded and will soon be available on the Connecticut Retail Merchants Association and CBIA's website. And finally, I'd like to give a special thanks to Department of Economic and Community Development Commissioner David Lehman, as well as our panelists, Joe Brennan and Tim Phelan. We appreciate the ever-changing nature of your work and for keeping us all informed. And thank you again, everyone, and please take care.
Can I get a final word in?
Oh, of course, Joe.
Sorry, I kept promising that website one more time. You can go on to cbia.com about the thermometers, or just go to ctcovidresponse.org. And I think it's in the chat room, other websites at DECD and elsewhere for information. So check those before you sign off. Thanks, Eric.
Great. Thank you, Joe. And thank you again, everyone. Please take care.
Thanks again.